The Kingdom of Lesotho has invited several observer missions for the upcoming 2022 national elections. Based on that invitation, the European Union has deployed its first ever EU election observer mission in Maseru today. At least 11 teams of long-term observers, each with 2 members, will assess every aspect of the electoral process. This mission will be permanently present in all 10 districts of Lesotho for the next 6 weeks.
In a matter of weeks, the Kingdom of Lesotho will be heading to the 2022 National Assembly elections. As political campaigning machines hit a full throttle, the EU Observer Mission is deploying the first and the biggest ever mission to Lesotho.
Everything that is related with the electoral process, so that means the voter, something that goes from the voters' registers to the media, to the rallies, to the political parties' activities, everything that is that has something to do with the elections, the electoral process, and what are the international standards and principles on electoral observation missions, because these are the rules that we apply on independence and international standards. That's why we are here.
The team will be on the ground to appreciate several aspects on how the election process functions and is using their expertise to formulate a well-informed opinion.
So the long-term observation mission also helps us to understand how the campaigning is functioning, how campaign finance and party finance is functioning, and to look into the aspects also in the districts, not only as short-term observers, but also long-term observers, meeting all the interlocutors on the ground, whether these are civil society organizations, women organizations, and looking into all the aspects and reference it to international standards and regional commitments. So this is in the framework of the United Nations, but also in the framework of African Union and the SABC, the Southern African Development Community.
The observer mission will provide an informed, comprehensive and impartial analysis and will publish its findings in a preliminary statement shortly after the elections day, while the final report will include recommendations for future elections. Rapelang Khatebe, SABC News, Maseru, Lesotho.
And our correspondent there, Rapelang Khatebe, joins us now to talk a little bit more about this. So the EU election observer mission team, as we've mentioned, the long-term observers having arrived for the 6-week period, Rapelang, I'd imagine then there would be another delegation of short-term observers that are expected. Do we know when, and how big will that team be?
Indeed, Sepisha, thank you very much to Africa as a whole. It is the first of its kind, I think, the observer mission that has descended onto Lesotho. They said initially it will be around a team of close to 80 people, which will likely be boosted at around the elections time with another team of around 30 more people. So understandably close to 100 or more of combination of experts from the legal fraternity, from media, from politics that will be in Lesotho, and they intend to stay for up to 6 weeks, even post-elections.
Why is it the first of its kind for the European Union, especially to Lesotho?
Indeed, that is what we try to understand. But I think one, having followed the events of the EU recently, they have invested heavily, I think, on the Lesotho reforms. They've invested heavily on the developments that have been. They literally want to see progress onto Lesotho, and I think they decided that seeing that elections also turn out well would be to their interest. Where there are challenges, they also want to have an intimate account of what actually happened, what transpired, such that if things they can do better, they decide that they know from on first hand as to what actually transpired.
Rapelang, any idea how many more election observer missions are accredited or welcome to observe those elections? And I want to focus particularly on civic society groups that will be observing the elections in Lesotho?
Indeed, we have seen several teams, mostly from SADC. There was another team that came just to assess the situation right on the ground. We have seen teams from the other voluntary groupings that have also come to observe, and we are told that they still more probably even from African Union. Lesotho's elections will be one of the most watched, I think, this time, due to the amount of assistance that the continent has offered, also that has come from other quarters, especially with South Africa also having hands-on into this year's election. So we are expecting quite a contingency of keen interested parties that will want to see Lesotho in the coming weeks.
And just to refresh the memory, or just to inform our viewers who aren't familiar with how many parties are contesting the elections, and just a quick update on Lesotho's electoral system and how it's going to work at the general elections on 7th October.
Indeed, there were 65 registered parties, but we were told about 52 have actually made confirmations that they will contest for the elections. This actually transpired because Lesotho has about 5 million that it will be distributing equitably to these parties for election campaigning or for purposes of elections. So it will be around 52 parties that will be contesting. Some will be forming coalitions that may drop the number maybe a little, but we are expecting, let's say, roughly about 50 parties that will be contesting this 2022 elections.
And the front runners at this point?
Indeed, we are seeing, allow me to call it a three-way horse race. We have arguably one of the biggest parties, ABC, as per last election roll, DC, that has been very stable Democratic Congress, and we are now seeing a major challenge to a newly formed party, RFP, and there are others which are breakaways that will probably have a huge impact. We know Lesotho will likely not be able to have one party. There will probably be coalitions. So we are seeing who will be a swing voter, but we are watching these three parties as major contestants, not disregarding that there are others that will cause a surprise, I believe, but looking at attendance, looking at the turnout, looking at the campaign muscle, the three-horse party is what we should be watching.
Rapelang, obviously social media has its own opinion about who's contesting and on what ticket. There was a lot to be said about a Chinese man who was seen to be contesting the elections. Just tell us a little bit more about that. All right, it seems like, unfortunately, we have lost contact with our colleague Rapelang Khateb. Of course, unfortunately, shedding affecting us all.